All right, welcome to Power Hour. I'm going to make this very sweet, fun, exciting. I have Amie with me here from the ASPCA, who's going to chime in on a couple of points. And I'm really excited to have her. And I was really excited to listen to the legislation happening. So to introduce myself, my name is Nancy Pascal, and I'm working with My Dog is My Home. I am the former director of the Faith and Community Partnerships with de Blasio. Do not hold it against me. Or don't cheer me on either. It's all good. I learned a lot. I love working with the community. And I love what my dog is my home is doing. And I'm actually new to the world of co-sheltering, though I'm not new to the world of pets. I'm very honored to be here with you guys. So I guess the first question is, we talked a little bit. Some people were in the meeting about the PUP Act. We have a bill on the floor. It's called the PUP Act, and the number of our bill is HR 397. And so I want to hand it over to Amie for a second to talk a little bit and just give us a quick refresher on the PUP Act.
Thank you, Nancy. And yeah, so I'm just so thrilled to be here. One of the best parts of the work that I do is connecting with amazing people and organizations with a shared goal of improving the lives of people and pets. And it's been so wonderful to work closely with so many incredible organizations like My Dog is My Home and people like Nancy. So thank you for having me. So the PUP Act, for a little bit of context, and for those of you who didn't attend our earlier talk, the ASPCA has recently identified the housing crisis as a major contributor to animal shelter overpopulation. And so housing legislation has been prioritized in our policy work. We even created a housing policy director position, and I'm happy to say that Susan Riggs, our senior housing policy director, is here to help answer any housing questions that come up on the call. But back to the PUP Act. So as any pet parent knows, pets are our family, and asking people to choose between safe shelter and their pets is just an absolutely devastating thought. I have 2 dogs. I can't even fathom having to separate from them, and I'm lucky that I haven't had to be faced with that decision. And it probably comes as no surprise that a good number of folks needing shelter will turn down the support if they can't bring their pets with them. So the PUP Act, providing for unhoused people with pets, Act, and it's one solution to the crisis. It's a federal bill that would create a $5 million annual grant program to help homeless shelters support residents with pets. And the funding is primarily for retrofitting or expanding homeless shelter facilities to accommodate more clients with pets. But the funding also includes basic veterinary care and behavior support to ensure absolute success of the program. So where the PUP Act stands now, Nancy mentioned that the bill is HR 3957. That means that it has been introduced in the House, and it is a bipartisan bill. And we're currently focused on getting it included into a massive piece of legislation called the Farm Bill. I will not bore you all with the details of the Farm Bill right now, but the very simplified outreach strategy is that we're encouraging everyone to reach out to their representatives and urge them to support the inclusion of the PUP Act in the Farm Bill. Right now, just with this political climate, including animal welfare legislation in larger packages that have to be passed is the most efficient and effective strategy right now. So while the PUP Act is technically bipartisan, you can see the co-leads. We've got Reps Crow, Fitzpatrick, Schiff, and Mace. And so that's a bipartisan bill, but it is heavily leaning Democratic on the co-sponsor side. So all the other supporting legislators are largely Democratic. And so right now, if your legislator is Republican, especially, it's even more vital that they hear from you on this issue. But a little bit later in the presentation, we'll touch on what it means to be a citizen lobbyist, how you can help move legislation forward, ways you can help get the PUP Act passed. But right now, I hand it back over to Nancy to talk a bit about what we can do right now.
I will take laughs as we go along, no worries. So what can we do right now to move the needle with the PUP Act? How can we advance our cause for co-sheltering spaces? And the truth is, there is a big elephant in the room. Many people have felt shut out of politics. Many people feel upset, angry, frustrated, helpless, hopeless. angry. There's a lot going on in the world where you may not even feel comfortable talking about this issue. Some people feel, is my issue big enough to talk about? But actually, you do have the power. Right now, the first step is for us to organize. And the second thing is, and I consider it the first thing, is the power of knowing. Do we actually have any power? Can we move the needle? Can we make a difference? Many people are starting to pull away and feel as though we don't. But the first step is actually knowing that we, the people, are actually at the top of our government systems. So many times when you want to begin to organize and when you want to start organizing, and you guys have already been doing it. This conference right here is a sign of activism. This is a powerful movement to have hundreds of people on a call at a conference. But I think a lot of people forget that when we're looking at our government systems, that we're not on the bottom of it. We're at the top. So this is actually the New York City's organizational chart. This is not something I drew up. This is not something I wrote. This actually comes out of our New York City charter. And someone actually took the time to write out an organizational chart. And if you look at the very top of that organizational chart, you'll see above the mayor of the city of New York, it reads, the people of the city of New York, boroughs of the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island. And then it's the mayor. So we choose our elected officials. We are the boss. At least I like to tell myself that in almost every situation. But in this situation, it really is true. Hold on, did I go back too far? Okay. So the question is, what is our role? There's elected officials, people we elect, and we are considered constituents. Okay, so elected officials are expected to advocate for the interests, concerns, and needs of their constituents when making decisions and crafting policy. That's what they're tasked to do. Constituents, that is us, in turn, have the right to hold their representatives accountable through various means, such as voting, contacting your representative, and participating in public forums. So what does that actually mean, and how is that all panning out? Well, according to the 2018 Johns Hopkins University survey, citizens know very little bit about our institutions and what they do. And when I say that, I don't mean on an educational, I don't mean if you went to high school or you have a master's degree, all across the board, a PhD, a doctor, many people are not paying attention. We're giving them trillions of dollars of our tax money, and we don't even know what's really happening. Almost half of people surveyed didn't even know what their monies was spent on in their state. 20% couldn't name their legislator, and a third couldn't name their governor. According to Pew Research, voter turnout between 2018 and 2022 was 37% of Americans that voted consistently. And there's a difference. So there was high turnout for presidential election, high turnout for those. But when we're looking at every election, when we're looking at local elections, which are extremely important, only 37% of the community is actually voting regularly. Is that bad news or good news? I think it is room for a lot of opportunity. I want to give you another sense of how we're voting, how we're showing up. Most people say, and this is coming out of the census, most people say that the reason why they didn't vote is because they're too busy, their work schedule, their school schedule. Second, the most common way to vote is through the DMV. And if you don't have a driver's license, if you can't afford to get a driver's license or an ID, it can be a barrier. Homeowners vote about 58% of the time. And only 36%, 36.5% of renters are voting regularly. That has an impact. That has an impact on the things that we need. But I really believe there's so much hope and opportunity. Those low numbers don't mean we should give up or back up. It means there's so much more room to grow. We can push those numbers. So we have a bill and it's in Congress, but what does that mean? You know, and how long is it going to sit there? Is anything going to happen? And my thought process is that it doesn't matter in a way because we have a job to do. And I think one of the first things we should really look at as a group, as a whole, is actually how does Congress work? And I'm just going to give you a brief outlook. So Congress has 535 members total, and they make up two parts: the House of Representatives, which most of us call our congressmen, right? And then the other half is the US Senate. So I'm not talking about your local senator. I'm talking about your US senator and your congressman that you usually call your congressman. So your representative, there are 435 members in the country today. And the way in which you find out how many states, so for example, California has 14, whereas Vermont has 1. And the reason for that is the size of this of your space. So every 700,000 people, you are entitled to a representative, right? They serve 2 terms and they're considered for re-election every even year, okay? For the US Senate, every state gets 2. Everybody gets 2 US senators and they represent the entire state. 6-year term elections every even year, right? So they're there for a very long time. And in the Senate, the majority must work with the minority to set the rules for debate and legislation. So what does that actually mean? It means that anything that moves through Congress almost always has to be bipartisan if it's really going to work. There rarely does something just one side. I don't even think that's a thing. We have to work together to be able to move anything through Congress. And I give some examples of that tomorrow. But one great example is HIV. When HIV hit the country, because of its stigma, because of the things that were happening around that time, insurance didn't even cover your medical bills if you had HIV. It took individual citizens such as ourselves, and the person who actually wrote up, you know, the writing for presenting this bill to Congress was a librarian who was a volunteer, and they were able to move. Things move fast when the people need it to move fast, because the people are what they're working for. This is the 118th Congress. So if everybody likes, I happen to love the number 18, but 118 is our number. And in the House of Representatives, right now, there are 218 Republicans, and they are the majority, and 213 Democrats, and 4 vacant seats. So this is when you see on the news, people are fighting to be the majority. Like, who cares? Why does it matter? It matters because whoever is the majority in the House of Representatives gets to run the rules. They get to say what goes up. So they get to say, you know what, I think this issue is important. This is what we want to put up. So it's very important technically, you know, who is the majority. Right now, the Republicans are the majority. In the US Senate, where there are 100 seats, the Democrats are the majority, but they're holding on to it by by a string, right? They're holding on to that majority because actually there are 3 seats that are independents that caucus with Democrats. Technically, we have 48, the Republicans have 49, but because we caucus, and caucus means we collaborate, we work together with some of these independents, and they tend to vote with the Democrats, right? And that's how we've added up to 51 seats. So that's how come we kind of are holding on to the Senate. Elections for the US Senate this year is going to be a big one. There are 33 US senators up for re-election. 10 of them are Republican seats, 20 are Democratic seats, and 3 independent that work with us right now, those seats are up also. So things can change drastically. The committee, which is where our bill is, Amie was talking about it. Once you present your bill, it's now in the committee. The committee holds hearings, debates, and they amend the bill before voting on whether to send it to the full chamber. So many times what happens is a bill goes in, people say, I don't like this, but I want this, and people make changes to it to see if it can pass. So there are many strategies, and Amie was talking about how the ASPCA is using different strategies to make it through. I'm glad Amie brought up HR means House of Representatives. That means that's where the bill was sent to. If it said S, then it would come from the Senate, okay? And every year, these numbers get changed. So this is 2023, we're 3,597, so it's a lot. The bill is assigned to a committee related to its subject matter, and the PUP Act is currently in the Agriculture, Animal Welfare Subcommittee and Financial Services Committee. So I'm going to give it to Amie to kind of come in here if she wants.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. When I mentioned the Farm Bill earlier, that is the strategy that we're employing this year to get the PUP Act passed. And as Nancy's talking about committees, I think it's a good opportunity to look at the committee process through the lens of the PUP Act. So right now, we are in the midst of a very weird congressional session and cycle where the PUP Act was actually supposed to be voted on last year. We don't know when that vote is going to happen. So we've got a great opportunity to kind of re-strategize, regroup, and start to put pressure on our legislators right now. The Farm Bill is a massive piece of legislation that it governs like agriculture programs and housing programs for the next 5 years after it's passed. And it is overseen by the Agriculture Committee. So when it's in the process of being drafted by the House and Senate, each one has an Agriculture Committee. So you've got your House Ag Committee and you've got your Senate Ag Committee, and they both have to draft versions of the Farm Bill. And so while we're in that process right now, what we're doing is we are contacting legislators who are on the Ag Committee. So if you have a legislator who is on the Agriculture Committee, your senator is likely on the Agriculture Committee because there's just less senators, but your representative may or may not be. Either way, they will vote on it eventually. And so the goal here is to reach out to them and get them to, the ask is really support the inclusion of the PUP Act in the Farm Bill. And so, like just focusing on the Agriculture Committee right now is a really important stage that we're at with the PUP Act. And then later on, we're going to want to put pressure on all the legislators in Congress because eventually they'll all have to vote on it. So hopefully that helps a little bit looking at like the committee process through the lens of the Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is kind of a unique process as well. So other bills get introduced in the House or the Senate, and then they go through various committees. But the Farm Bill is kind of a unique situation. But again, like I said, it's a great opportunity this year to get the PUP Act included in it. And we're hopeful. So hopefully you all will join in on this effort. Nancy will talk a little bit more about how you guys can all get involved. But that is the committee component of what we're looking at with the PUP Act right now.
Thank you, Amie. Thank you, Amie. So what do we do now? What are we going to do now? Um, well, I'm trying to click. Oh, oops, sorry. We take action. I love this slide because I love cats and dogs, but we're taking action. And we're going to take action state by state. And that means we have to begin to work across the aisle. And the question is, do you really know who represents you? And I would like us to take a moment right now to find our representative in our community. So there's these links are all the ways in which you can find your representative. You can go to house.gov and quickly find it. The ASPCA, if you look at the third link, aspca.org, look up. They have a great setup that will give you all of your elected officials, I believe. And also congress.gov members, find your member. So congress.gov. So I want to give like 2-3 minutes to see if you guys can quickly put in your zip code, find your representative, and put them in the chat. The first couple, we'd like to see if we're going to see any agricultural people. Is there things happening in the chat, guys? Because I can't tell. Are people with us still? Are you guys still there?
Still here.
All right, good. Thanks. Good. Not too boring. All right, good. While you're putting those names in and you're looking for your legislator, I really want you guys to begin to really look at this differently, and not just for the PUP Act, but understanding that this is your right at any point in time for any issue. And it's very important to understand your local government as well. So if you have a pothole, if there's something going on your sidewalk, you are not going to contact your congressman or your senator. What you would probably be looking to talk to is your city council member, your district leader. And really, those things are super important. And at another time, I would love to go over local politics and how you can utilize that. But honestly, that's just a Google search. The system that I want to share with you throughout these couple of days, you can use this for local politics all the way up. Okay, so we're starting because we're at a federal level. And this gives us as an opportunity for animal lovers and human services lovers who care about this issue. This is our opportunity to organize, right? Around this bill. We can look at ourselves state by state and really see the power that we have in working together. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay, did people put things in the chat? Can anybody yell anybody out? Or how many do we have in there? Any at all? Okay, so I can't tell.
There are a couple in there, Nancy.
There are. Is it can somebody read out one?
Sure. Kathy McMorris Rogers. And then
Congressman?
Sydney. Yes. And then Congressperson Sydney Kamliger Dove.
Okay, awesome. Listen, I will tell you that figuring out who your representatives are, who your elected officials are, can be very, very juicy gossip, okay? But you will find out such good, juicy details about them. So it's not all boring. So we'll talk about our legislators. If you're coming tomorrow, I would love for you guys to already know who your legislator is. So that's your homework. It's just, if you're coming for storytelling, we're going to talk about how to build this relationship. I'm going to bring it back to the ASPCA, and we're just going to briefly touch on advocacy. Okay, I feel like something's misspelled, versus lobbying. And I'm going to move this slide really quickly.
Thanks, Nancy. I don't know if it was misspelled. I started to read it and I questioned it myself, but I think it looked fine. Okay, yeah, so I work with so many amazing organizations, as I said at the top of this call, um, and citizen advocates, and often get asked to clarify the parameters around lobbying, like what constitutes lobbying, who can't lobby. And I think especially if you're with a nonprofit organization, it can get a bit confusing because my role entails doing a ton of outreach to nonprofit organizations and asking them to reach out to their legislators. And so I get this question a lot. So Nancy asked me to join and just kind of go over some of this today. So first, what is lobbying? And apologies for those of you who already know this. I'll try to speed through it, but I think it's important for the folks who are a little confused about the process. So lobbying is more or less defined as any attempt to influence legislation, and every private citizen who is represented politically by a designated lawmaker, or also known as a constituent, has the right to participate in what we call citizen lobbying. So if you're contacting your legislator as their constituent and not as a representative of an organization, you're still lobbying, but that's citizen lobbying. And so can nonprofits engage in lobbying activity? According to the IRS, a nonprofit organization, so like the ASPCA, for example, may engage in some lobbying as long as it doesn't account for a large percentage of their efforts and budget. So yes, but it's just not super simple. And another question that's asked often is the difference between lobbying and advocacy. And many nonprofit groups advocate for their cause or mission, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're lobbying. So lobbying always involves advocacy, but advocacy doesn't always include lobbying. So we'll break it down a little bit. So what constitutes advocacy? Using social media to spread the word about an issue or a cause, meeting with a government official to explain how a particular issue is affecting a particular group. So for example, explaining the impacts of the housing crisis on the community, or like animal welfare groups can discuss the consequences of the housing crisis, like high owner surrenders contributing to shelter overpopulation, without directly asking that legislator to support legislation, just talking about the issue and the impacts. Lobbying, on the other hand, is asking your representative to vote for or against a specific legislation, or it can include using an online petition to ask members of your organization to contact their legislator, specifically asking that legislator to support or oppose legislation. So once again, it's attempting to influence legislation or policy. So in summary, if you work for a nonprofit, you can still, and we encourage this, you can still contact your legislator and ask them to support the POP Act and the Farm Bill, or to co-sponsor the POP Act, as long as you're there as a constituent and not representing your organization. So it doesn't get kind of confusing there. So I hope that helps clarify a little bit, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we can get to it at the end. And now I'll hand it back over to Nancy to touch on constituent rights.
Great. So to wrap up what Amie also said is basically, if they are your representative, you have every right to speak with them. You can say, oh, I work for this organization, but you make it clear that you're there as their constituent. As a constituent, you have a right to representation, whether you voted for them or not. It doesn't matter. You have a right to participate in the process. That means you have a right. Everyone has a right to vote if you are, of course, voting age and be able. Everyone has a right to access. You have a right to petition. You have a right to free speech, and you have a right to accountability. These are all of your rights. And when I say a right to petition, I want to make it clear that you can ask your legislator to send you information, to send you documents. You have every right to know what they are doing. Now, do we have time for all of that? No, but not too many people have time. Some people do this as a hobby. Some people love doing this. Generally, all of us are trying to pay our bills. We're trying to get to work. We're trying to take care of our kids. But understanding that this is part of a process in making sure that your issues are heard, you have to keep in mind that that if you're not participating in any of this or in any way, don't be surprised if what you care about is not being shown. Oh, let me go back. Sorry, let me go back really quickly. And I really want to stop here and ask if there's anybody who has any questions.
Nancy, I see some questions. I'm looking on my phone here.
Okay.
And I think, okay, this is interesting. I don't know the answer to this, but maybe you or Susan will. So Melinda, this is a great question. So isn't there also a clause about human civil rights being exempt from this? And I think you're referring to lobbying rules. Our SCORE advisor from our NGO and co-op once explained that because we are politically involved in basic Indigenous human rights, that does not count under no lobbying. I do not know the answer to that. I wonder if you do, Susan or Nancy.
I am not 100% sure. I would have to look that up. But what I want to reiterate is that anybody can talk to their own senator. But here's what I want to make very clear. If I'm talking to a senator in Texas and I'm calling him from Brooklyn, he does not care. He doesn't care. He care less. I don't vote for him. I'm not part of his team. It doesn't matter. If you want to move your elected official, you have to focus on him understanding your power. The goal is that when we talk about state by state, is that the New Yorkers have to work in New York. And when we come to terms of joining forces, we join forces. But I can't answer that question unless I really look it up. But to me, it almost doesn't matter because you can go to your constituent about anything that you want to see done. It's when you're going to another state or another elected official, is he gonna care? Not always. But I'll save room there for someone else.
There is another question that came up, and this I think definitely would be for Susan to answer. It's regarding ASPCA's housing policy history. And Melinda, thank you for this question. So heavy question. As you may know, housing rights have a lot of deeply embedded racism. The ASPCA took a very long time to get on board with taking housing seriously. What has the ASPCA done to help repair, remedy the fact that it took them decades to listen to what predominantly BIPOC communities were reporting about housing discrimination? I think that summarizes the question, and I'm really sorry that that's been your experience, Melinda.
Yeah. Hey, Amy. And thank you for the question. I have been with the ASPCA for 7 years. I know that among the national animal welfare groups, we were the first to dedicate a campaign to housing. Obviously, housing is not directly in our mission, but certainly we want to address housing as it relates to the viability of keeping pets and people together. I'm not familiar with any history beyond my 7-year tenure as it relates to housing, but I will say within the lens of housing and certainly in the work that I do, my lens is strictly on equity. I absolutely recognize that there's huge and growing disparities among lower income people and communities of color as it relates to access to housing that's appropriate for their budgets, as well as housing that allows them to keep their pets and their families whole. So, I'm happy to talk about more about what you perceive to be the ASPCA's history around housing and equity, but I can guarantee you it is my sole focus in my role as the Director of Housing Policy. So happy to talk more about that, but can't really speak to the history before or what you've experienced with the ASPCA.
And I just want to add, I know, Nancy, you're not able to see the chat, but we have a lot of people listing their representatives, and I'm going to call you all out because a lot of you have ad committee members as representatives. So if you do, I am putting pressure on you. Please reach out to that member and ask them, urge them, and let them know, why does it matter to you? Let them know. But if you have a narrative to share, if you know someone who's experienced Any issue that's trying to be addressed by the PUP Act, please share that. Again, stories go a long way. But right now, it is incredibly important for them to hear from all of us, especially the Republicans, and I can see a couple here. So if you have any questions about how to get involved and what to say in messaging, you can reach out to Christine, Nancy from My Dog is My Home, or myself and Susan from the ASPCA. And we're happy to guide you through the process. So
we're going to get a chance to do it on the third day. So we're stringing you along. We want to talk tomorrow about the strategy around, people with lived experience. They're powerful. Your voice is so needed. And we need you in the fight. And we need you focused and in it. And what we're hoping is that people get involved in a whole way, right? In a way in which it's part of your life to know who's representing you and holding people accountable, because it's the long game. This issue is not going to turn around with one bill, right? It's not. But the more we engage other people, and the more we educate the community that surrounds us. So if you can't educate your own representative, how are you then sharing it with the people around you? How are we getting support? And so I really want to focus on that tomorrow and see where we go with it. And so I'm really excited about that. I know I'm ending probably a little early, and I'm willing to take more questions, but I'm super excited about our semifinalists. And I really want to encourage you guys to please go into the photos and vote. And also, if you have submitted a photo, please put the name of your pet and maybe the state or just a little something about them. The competition is fierce. There's nearly 300 photos. So how are you going to stand out, right? And think about our own stories, right? And how are we going to stand out from the crowds of people who have issues at hand? How do we stand out? It's by our stories and putting it out there. So we have 2 semifinalists, and I want to share them with you. Sorry, I'm having a terrible time with this thing. I want everybody to meet Roadkill Bill, formerly known as Bill, and he represents Michigan. Now, if nobody noticed, if your animal or pet is called Bill, you are automatically in the semifinalists, so there's plenty of time. The next bill that we have here is Bill, and he is representing Kentucky. So we want you to keep voting. We have Michigan and Kentucky in the running. I saw some great photos. So I would love to see more and to see some stories. And I'm so thankful that you guys stayed on so late. And if you have any other questions, please let me know. Please put it in the chat. And I thank you very much. If anybody has any comments.
I just want to touch on a comment that came up in the chat. And this is such an important point that I think that I overlooked and should have mentioned. So if you find that your legislator does support the PUP Act, if they're a co-sponsor, please thank them for being a co-sponsor, for supporting the PUP Act. There has been no votes around or on the agriculture committees or around the Farm Bill drafts. And so we're still going to want to encourage them to, stay the course and support the PUP Act by voting for its inclusion in the Farm Bill. Sorry, my dog's scratching. I don't know if you guys can hear it. But yeah, no, and that's a really important point. So we definitely want to extend our gratitude for the legislators who are already supporting this legislation, and let them know that their constituents support their support, so we see them.
Definitely. And we talk about that tomorrow as well. If your legislator is a co-sponsor, you want to make the other legislators jealous. You want to love bomb them with, thank you so much for supporting this bill, or send them a paw print or whatever. But a lot of times we approach our elected officials or that's the only way we look at it. in an adversarial way. And sometimes you need to. Activism has many, many forms. And it's important that we're able to utilize all of them. And there's also a space for all types of activism. What I'm talking about, this kind of activism, is around organizing, around an issue that you care very much about. And we'll talk more about how you do that in a bipartisan way, and how we send out, I call it love bombing, which, people just don't do anymore. But here at My Dog is My Home, I think we want to build the long game where we're actually making ourselves known. The ASPCA is, and many of the nonprofits here today are super well respected, and hold so much power. And they didn't get there by always fighting. They got there by being strong, by being consistent, by building their people around them, and by building relationships to get things done. And that's what you have to do sometimes. And so I appreciate everybody who's been on this call, and I hope you come tomorrow. I have some interesting stories and ways in which we could work together, even if you have a really, really busy schedule, how you can stay in touch, and how you can get involved in the process. So thank you so much. Any other questions?
Just want to add too that I see so many familiar names on here. I see Kristen from Annie and Millie's, so many familiar names, and a big shout out. I know, the ASPCA has, kind of taken over this call with My Dog is My Home, but I want to acknowledge all of the groups that have really collaborated with us, with My Dog is My Home, on especially PUP Act efforts last fall. We had an incredible collaborative effort where a coalition of over 100 organizations, and that's not just animal welfare orgs, that was human service providers, faith-based providers. They signed on to, including My Dog is My Home, a bunch of groups that I can see here on this call, onto a letter that we sent to the Ag Committee leadership on the Senate and House side. And it just received so much support that we have extended it into kind of a coalition and an endorsement list. And we'd like to continue that collaboration, particularly because when we message to legislators and we say, this is not just an animal welfare issue, this is a human issue, this is a everybody issue, this affects the entire community, and look at all the groups that are coming together that are unlikely allies. You just don't necessarily see the ASPCA working with like a faith-based organization. It just doesn't really intersect normally. And so I do want to shout out to all the groups that, have been amazing partners, and love to continue that effort with all of you. And but it's not, just an ASPCA thing. It's not just My Dog is My Home, though I will say y'all have been amazing partners. But yeah, it has such broad support that we just need to continue showing that to legislators, because the more organizations and people that are behind this and saying to them, we want this, they really can't, in theory, they can't ignore us, right? So,
I'm sorry, Amy, I got excited with what you were saying. And just to say, the people cannot be stopped when they show this is what they want. And it's really interesting. I mentioned that I did not have a lot of experience with, animal welfare, but it does come across people's lives. I worked at the DA's office for a short time. It was about 2 years. And within those 2 years, I saw several cases within the domestic violence unit. And that was back in 2014, 15. And, prosecutors, people wouldn't necessarily think that a prosecutor at a DA's office would be so, would fight with a lot of fight, let's just say, you would not think that they would be necessarily a partner, but they have inside information, and they have seen it. I stopped myself because I don't want to traumatize anybody on the call, but being in the domestic violence unit and hearing some of the stories that happened to animals that were left with the abuser were horrific. And so you'd be surprised where your allies come from, and sometimes where your allies are not. I was surprised to hear that not all veterinarians think it's a great idea. There are stigmas that we have to get past. And that takes education. And the more people, the more diversity in economics, in race, the more people that are different that get together for one cause, that's the best way to move the needle. And that's really the way you can move things quickly.
Yeah,
You got me
I
excited.
agree. I second that.
Yeah. So when you start seeing other people coming in, that means you have a really important cause.
Agree. And I just want to add, Melinda, I want to acknowledge this comment. So Melinda says, I said it early on to My Dog is My Home, that pet housing, co-sheltering, etc., is an Indigenous issue. It is a Black land issue, a land back issue, more specifically, but ASPCA and others need to invest in more of our Indigenous communities to get many of us to care. So I would love to get on a call with you. I, want to hear more about, your experience and your thoughts. From my role, legislative engagement, we'd love to have your voices also elevated. And so would love to bring you on board with our advocacy team, but definitely want to talk more. And I hope you do reach out to me after this and get on a call and hear more about your experience and what you're thinking around that. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I also wanted to say it's not just a ASPCA or organization. It's in the fabric of our country and the history. So I, was looking at somebody's IG and educating myself and seeing the history of, there was a point in time in the United States where it was against the law for Black people to own dogs. Simple as that. So yes, there is a history in this country, absolutely, where, not just that Black people couldn't have pit bulls, but they couldn't have any dog. And so there is a history. The question is, what are we doing with that history, and what is our focus? The thing is when you're educating someone, you sort of turn on a light, and the light brightens the room and you kind of see everything in it. When we're looking at things like the PUP Act, we're trying to be a laser. That means everything gets narrowed into one powerful force. And then we can disperse and educate and pick other issues. But it's extremely important to understand where we are in our advocacy at any given point. And I think these questions are super, super powerful. Christina has her hand raised, and I'm not sure how to.
I can see the question.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think you can probably
just ask it.
The question is, do you have a list of bills to comment on? And I'm not sure are you referring to housing bills, or can you clarify?
Yeah. Are there any lists? I know locally in our state, we have different groups that do that, but nationally on housing and the bills you've talked about, are there any around housing and having your pet, or healthcare and homelessness, that kind of stuff that involves having your friend with you, that kind of stuff? Is there a national list?
Yes.
I'm going to let Amie answer that, but I want to make it clear that when you say there's federal, which means when we're at the federal level, we're talking about a bill that would affect every state, right? So the PUP Act bill, because it's in the federal, it's in the US, and it's in a representative, it's in Congress. Because it's in Congress, whatever we're asking in Congress means that if they make it a law, it goes throughout everybody in the state gets it. If you're looking at something that's just in California, it only affects California. And so Amie does have in the previous call listed out all of the legislation that's out there in regards to animal welfare, human welfare, and co-sheltering. So I'll stop there. I just wanted to clarify the difference. I actually don't know if there's another federal bill out there, but I do know there's many state legislation out there.
I can only speak for the ASPCA. Maybe Susan can weigh in on any other federal bills. But we do have another federal bill that has gotten a lot less spotlight just because it doesn't have an opportunity to get folded into the Farm Bill. And that one is one that I love because I am a mom of two pitty mixes. And it is called Pets Belong with Families Act. We haven't really messaged much on it this year, again, just because it's a Farm Bill focus, but that would remove overly broad restrictions in public housing, and that includes breed restrictions and size restrictions. And so that is the other housing legislation that we have supported. And I see Susan jumping on, so if you want to add to that, please do.
Yeah, and that particular bill, assuming that Congress starts to actually do anything, would have a huge impact. As I mentioned, if you guys joined us on the legislative session, for many years, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has required public housing to include pets. And initially, that was all laid out in federal regulation, and over the years, HUD has become more and more regressive in terms of what they actually allow and what they delegate to each individual public housing authority, which is kind of a quasi-local governmental entity that administers public housing at the local level. And one of the things that they've been doing is putting size and breed restrictions on the residents of public housing. And that obviously is impacting, households that have lived there for a long time, have, brought dogs into their household that they love and cherish and treat as family members. So this, there's been an effort state by state to try and preempt that, but the easiest way, really the soundest way to do that would be at the federal level. And so that's why we've been working on that legislation. Beyond that, Christina, are you able to weigh in on tell me what state you're in? And I might be able to let you know if there's any critical legislation in your state. Or if you want to email me.
Yeah, I was thinking about the federal one. And yeah, and is there do you just say I approve this, I like this act, or it's a good act, or can you give me a sentence or two of what I would send in a card to say Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell about something like that, or do you need to go more in depth?
No, I think if you contact your own legislators, you let them know that you're in their district as a constituent of your district. This is a really important piece of legislation, and we hope that you'll support it or sponsor it.
And we will go over that tomorrow. We'll actually give you some language, everything.
I think that's it for questions. We covered everything.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining me on this call. Susan and Amie, thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody listening in and staying late. Get engaged, get involved is all I can say. We do have the power. Don't complain if you're not going to get yourself in there. And trust me, it can be very juicy gossip. I'm trying to tell you. There's so much that you can find out. You learn about these individuals and you follow along with them and you become a resource to these people. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys tomorrow and answering more questions. So I thank you very much. I think we're right a minute under